Welcome to Authentic Podcast number 6. I'm Scott Austin, CEO of Authentic Artists. I'm joined by Josh Ballard from Until June.
Hello.
Good morning, Josh.
Good morning, Seacrest.
Tell me what's going on with Until June, and I know you guys are in the studio.
We just finished.
And
in the studio.
Tell me how that went. How many songs? When do people get to hear it?
We don't know when people get to hear it, but we are planning on before summer, and we're looking at about 12 songs. And we finished up with producer Dave Darling, who put out our EP. Or should I say produced our EP?
I thought we put it out, but I can't, what do I know?
Dave produced it. And what else? It's going to contain a few tracks from our EP, 4, and then 8 brand new ones. And so we're looking before summer.
That's awesome. Now, tell me a little bit about this podcast gets heard by a lot of independent musicians. That's kind of why we started it, not just to hear ourselves talk, although we enjoy that part of it as well. Tell me about your writing process. Are you doing a lot of co-writing on the new record, or is it just the band internally?
Well, it's just the band internally. I think our first record, we got a lot of flack lyrically. I did most of the lyrics on the first record, and I think we decided to branch out a little bit, and the three of us guys pretty much wrote all the tunes together, whether it had been Dan coming up with a guitar idea, and then I coming in and finishing it, or Daniel coming up with the drum beat, I coming in with a part. After we wrote the basic melody, we would go in for about 2 or 3 days, and we'd each pick at the lyrics. So my brother, who lives 40 miles south, we would have a lot of conferences via our MacBooks and kind of going back and forth with lyric ideas, and we'd discuss it for a few days, and we'd go over it, and then once we settle in on some lyrics, kind of finalized it. But we made sure that the three of us were very much a part of every tune, and it was unusual because the first record, somebody writes something and the other person writes something, and just kind of, this one is very much a collaboration of the three of us. And for the most part, we the three of us just wrote the whole record.
Let's talk about that collaboration. First of all, what is it like being in a band with your brother?
Well, Daniel Dempsey, our drummer, has had to endure a lot having to be in a band with two brothers. Since Dan and I are only 2 years apart, we know each other really well. Growing up together, we were always really close. With that, we get a fair amount of arguing in. I mean, it's not a Gallagher Brothers situation, but we get in a fair amount of fights.
Maybe it should be. It'd be more, newsworthy.
Yeah, right.
So stuff like stole your truck in the sandbox when you were kids, does that come out when you're, trying to get a riff done?
I think less and less, but I think the tolerance for each other, if I start getting a bit of an ego, or I start thinking I'm the man or something, my brother quickly puts me in my place.
He reminds you of those, let's just say, slightly embarrassing moments from high school.
Yes. I mean, he's the kind of guy that, and I can do the same to him. And Daniel, unfortunately, our drummers had to put up with it. So he just kind of stands off the side with a smirk on his face while we yell at each other. And then things usually mull over pretty quick.
Now, let's talk about your guys' history. Obviously, we were friends long before we put out your record. And I really loved the band for really the past 5-6 years. Tell me a little bit about that evolution for you guys of, you got signed, the name of the band has a lot of relevance, I think, and you get signed to a major, and fill us in on what happens over the course of a young independent band these days.
Well, after we got out of our deal...
What deal? See, you're skipping too far ahead. We have to back up.
Well, we were with a company called Flickr, and they were under Provident Label Group, but under Sony BMG, and they put out our record, and they didn't necessarily do a great job putting it out, which is the tale of many rock and roll bands.
This was in what year? Was this 04?
Well, no, we signed in 2005.
Okay.
And then they ended up putting the record out in 2007. So that's another typical story that I had read about as a kid, kind of the Steve Albini story I had read about many times. And we had put out the record, or they had put out the record. We did a little bit of touring, toured the country about 3 times, kind of on some small tours. Nothing really stuck. Things blew up overseas as they were about to drop us. And our management at the time was able to kind of, get us out of our deal more or less. So here we had a #1 hit in Greece. It was #4 in Norway, #7 in Finland, and we didn't have a record deal. So for the first time, we were sitting in a pretty sweet spot. So the decision we we made at that point was take the money that we're making off some of these royalty checks and from some of this touring that we're doing overseas, let's go and record a record out of our pockets and just put it out. And it was kind of one of those quick things where the music industry is in a bizarre place right now. I mean, I guess the only interest that we had was kind of overseas. We wanted to put an EP out really quick. We did a show where you came out, and we just liked you.
Well, I was having a good hair day that day, probably.
I was going to say, I think the hair had a lot to do with it.
No, but it's it's an interesting story, and I guess I didn't necessarily want you to feel like you have to throw people under the bus or anything like that. I think
Sure.
it's just the general tale is unfortunately the common tale of kind of getting your hopes dashed, and it's a tough time, I think, to be in the business. And what's kept you guys together?
Well, it's so cliche and cheesy to say, not giving up. But I think that's really it, in a sense. I mean, there are some people that just have it and some people that just don't. And I think that as long as you see yourself moving forward, it can only get better. But I definitely think there's that point where you start going backwards. We haven't gotten to that point yet. So until we get to that point, I think we're going to keep pressing forward. But in the music industry, I mean, when I moved out here in like 2001 as basically a kid, dropped out of school and moved out. I dreamed of being in a record label office with an A&R guy on the other side of the desk listening to my songs. I mean, that would be a dream come true. And hate to say that I'm not jaded now, but I mean, we've done that a handful of times and it's just kind of laughable a little bit. It's just kind of like, that's not really what it's about. I mean, you need those people in your career to make things happen, but it's not just about that. And it's not necessarily about the biggest record label putting the biggest record out or the biggest marketing plan together for you. You realize that your hands or your career are in the hands of so many different people and so many stars have to align. It's almost better just not to concern yourself with those things, just to make a great record and just to move forward and just try to do the best you can.
Have you ever wanted to quit?
Absolutely.
Daily, weekly, monthly, annually? Bi-weekly?
Probably annually, and then I realized that I don't know how to do anything else. So then I quickly get back into my little comfort zone and realize that I just need to move forward. I mean, the college thing was tough because I only got a few years of college in, so I never, I don't have a degree. Sure, I could finish it up, but at the end of the day, what am I going to do? Am I going to sit in an office and work a 9-to-5 gig?
No, like me.
Well, yeah, no.
Well, so let's talk about that drive that keeps you guys going. Your brother just got married, and we're all about the same age. You guys have me beat in the young category by a couple of years, but we're all about the same age. How hard is that? When you add that element of you're getting into your late 20s and everyone's getting married, buying houses, buying horses, whatever they do, and you're the guy without health insurance in a rock and roll band. Is it, like, how much of that plays into the trouble that you face on a daily basis?
Well, that's a great question because I do deal with that, and that does haunt me from time to time. And when I do see my buddies having kids, or I do see people, getting married and moving forward in their lives, and I'm the guy in the rock band. But then there are times where I'm thinking, oh, well, I just toured Asia, and I just met some journalist and got to cruise on the back of her, scooter in Hanoi and all night and hang out and travel to Hong Kong, and then we're in Greece, and and then those are kind of the experiences that most of my peers will never be able to experience. And I think going into the world of music and art in general, I think you have to have a totally different perspective on life. It's not about a white picket fence to me. It's not about having or making a certain amount of money and driving an SUV. I think those things are all nice, and some people need those as their necessities, but I've chosen at the age of 18 or 19 or whenever I decided to make music my career that I wasn't going down that path. I didn't want that life. I wanted a life that was much different. So that being said, I'm very comfortable with where we're at and where we're heading.
Okay, I want to talk about a funny story that you told me a while ago about a certain incident when you were valet parking cars to make ends meet, and I don't want to blow it for the audience. So tell us a little bit. Do you know which story I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course you do, because it's probably one of the best stories.
Well, we've told this a few times from stage too, but we actually just had our song just went #1 on the pop charts in Greece at the time. So we were pretty big overseas and was doing really well in Norway and Finland. And so I would have these, I was valeting cars because our royalty checks weren't coming in yet. So
did they ever come in, by the way?
They did. They started coming in a few months ago.
Okay, good.
It's been a little nice. I've been able to breathe a little bit. So we were. I was valeting cars in Beverly Hills at the spa, and I would have to call up the Sony offices, and they would patch me through at these interviews. The problem is I'm working. You know, I have to work an 8-hour day. So I'd, my buddy would be like, hey, can you cover for me? Like, no problem. So I'd hide over in the bushes with my cell phone. And there were times where I'd be on the phone for 2 hours straight, and he'd be running, hustling all over the place, parking these cars. And I'd be taking these interviews with, these radio stations in Greece and these magazines. And then I would do one for Asia because we were doing some stuff over there. So I'd be doing it for 2 hours at a time, and I'd be literally sitting in between the bushes on my cell phone. And one day I was over there, I was talking, I just finished up a conversation, and my buddy was kind of pointing to me, and he was talking to a woman that just handed her keys over to him. He's kind of waving. And so he waves me over and he says, Josh, come here for a second. So I run over and he says, what's the name of your band again? And I was like, it's Until June. And this woman just freezes. She just freaks out. And he's like, Josh, this lady, she's from Athens. And of course she knew our song because our song had been doing really well over there. And she could not, for the life of me, or for the life of herself, couldn't figure out why I was parking her car because we had the #1 song in Greece. So I quickly gave her a little rundown of the music industry and how horrible it is and why I don't.
Well, let's talk about that. Is it horrible? I did my time, as they say.
Yeah, but
I spent 10 years.
You're the perfect one to ask for this because you were at the majors when money was rolling in.
I caught the tail end of it, but see, I'm not the one being interviewed, so I'm going to put it to you. But seriously, is it really worse, or is it actually in some ways more advantageous to the majority of independent artists? Okay, we know that no one's going to sell 10 million records ever again, but does that mean though that more independent artists can sell as a whole?
Well, I'm more upset at DigiDesign than I am at record labels within it because DigiDesign has made it possible for everyone to make a record.
Well, and let's not forget our friends at GarageBand.
Yeah,
but
right.
But so is that the problem that there's is it the filtration that's lacking and missing in today's music business?
Well, I think in pop music it's a little different because I think there is a quality in pop music that is just so high as just far as like, you look at a Britney Spears record or something, or a Lady Gaga record, and the production is so amazing and out of control with those records. Not that it's necessarily my thing, but it's, you're not going to find that in a lot of independent artists. So if that's your style of music, if you're wanting to hit the clubs, that's going to be, you can't really touch that. As far as just like singer-songwriter stuff, as far as rock and roll, where the production maybe is not as high and it's more about the songwriting, then it definitely gets more competitive, and it's a little bit frustrating, I think, because there is so many options out there. And then on top of that, people don't buy a ton of music these days, So, I'm kind of falling in that category. I don't buy a ton of music. I'm still listening to the 500 records I got for free at Sony a couple of years ago when I walk in.
You mean you didn't sell them all at
I sold
Amoeba?
A good chunk of them.
Okay.
Yeah, I sold a good chunk, but I still have a good 150.
Let's talk about that last point you just made. We just did a podcast last week on streaming, and I have made a lot of bold predictions for 2010, something I don't normally like to do because I don't think I really know much about anything. But I do think that this will be the turning point year when the idea that you have to pay for an individual MP3 download is kind of washed from our memory. It's been a long time coming, but I really think that this streaming and cloud-based services are probably going to start to take over beginning this year. I think that people are finally over that old psychology of I have to own it. I have to literally have the MP3 on my hard drive. People are actually, I think, people like Bob, the opposite. They're like, I want as little information on my hard drive as possible. I have way too much. And I think that is going to be very beneficial to artists like you who maybe, like you, wouldn't necessarily put up 99 cents to buy it or download it, but who would stream it maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 times, generating a tiny but a royalty.
I think that's genius, but I'm the kind of guy that, my parents in my stocking had a $15 iTunes gift card and I was kind of bummed out at it, I'm still the old-fashioned guy where I like to own the actual CD, but you're right. I think with my computer, I don't like to put tons of music on my computer because I got other stuff I got to do on that. I have pictures, I have little video things that I've edited, and I just like it clean. I don't want it, I'll put some of my favorite records on there and that's it. But I also find myself going to YouTube a lot. When I want to hear a tune, I just go to YouTube and I just kind of listen to it. And I think the streaming thing is absolutely the direction that things might head. I'm not as in tune with that kind of stuff as I probably should be, but the Pandora thing is out of control. I go to so many parties now, and all they have is Pandora up.
And I think that for you guys, we've seen on our end, obviously we service Pandora, all the streaming services, and I think that the one real benefit from it is coming up as a similar artist or a like artist, meaning someone's listening to Coldplay, Viva La Vida, and Pandora or whatever service suggests until June. That's, I think, the real power. That's the kind of the new paradigm of filtration and taste making, is that, hey, you liked this, you might like this too.
But then there's those times where I plug in my band and then this certain song comes up by some artist. I'm like, what? Are you serious? I sound like these guys, and it's a real disappointment. So,
well, it's not a flawless science yet, but it is setting the stage, I think, for a very interesting way for people to discover music. I think it used to be you had to be on the radio, you had to be endorsed by the NME or whatever it is, and I think that those things are still very, very important, clearly. But there's a lot of artists that are creeping up that maybe never would have been heard but for these social mediums, these online networks.
Absolutely.
Well, Josh, thanks for stopping by on a very cold, very rainy, and very power-stricken day. I think we've lost power 3 times during this recording.
I think something like that. But my pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
Thanks for coming by, and we look forward to hearing the new music.
Thank you.
Authentik Podcast number 6 until June's Josh Ballard joining us, giving us the musk, the stench, the warmth. See ya.